Hey everyone, welcome to your deep dive
Yeah,
on PTSD and the support systems available to veterans.
that's pretty intense.
It looks like you've got a really interesting mix of sources here.
Yeah.
A government document on federal benefits for veterans,
Mm-hmm.
some PTSD research,
Yeah.
a website listing additional resources,
Okay.
and even a couple of video titles that caught my eye.
Really?
Let's see what we can unpack for you.
It's a pretty comprehensive collection.
Yeah,
And it seems like you're interested in both the condition itself,
yeah,
PTSD,
right.
and the practical support available to veterans who might be dealing with it.
Yeah.
A great place to start, I think, is with understanding what PTSD is and how it manifests.
Yeah, I was just looking through this research article and
Yeah.
something jumped out at me.
Hmm.
Apparently back in 2007,
Mm-hmm.
the VA confirmed that prolonged exposure therapy
Mm.
is really effective for treating PTSD.
Wow.
That seems like a pretty big deal,
It is.
especially considering this research was happening
Yeah.
within the VA itself.
It was a significant finding, for sure. Prolonged exposure therapy involves gradually confronting traumatic memories in a safe environment. And the VA research showed it can be incredibly effective for veterans struggling with PTSD.
That's good to know.
What's fascinating is that this therapy has even been shown to help veterans who have traumatic brain injuries,
Really?
which, as you might imagine, often occur alongside PTSD.
So you're saying even if someone has a brain injury on top of PTSD,
Right.
this therapy can still be helpful.
Exactly.
That's good to know. But before we get too deep into treatment,
Okay.
let's back up a bit.
Okay.
The article mentions 4 main types of PTSD symptoms.
Right. You might experience reliving the event, even years later, through nightmares or flashbacks.
Well,
It's like your mind is suddenly back in that traumatic moment.
that sounds incredibly intense. Are there other ways that PTSD can manifest?
Definitely. You might also find yourself avoiding anything that reminds you of the event,
Okay.
whether it's certain places, people, or even conversations. It's as if your mind is trying to shield you from those painful memories.
That makes sense. The article also mentioned struggling with negative thoughts and feelings,
Right.
like feeling hopeless about the future
Mm-hmm.
and also being easily startled or angered. I imagine those symptoms could really impact
Yeah.
someone's daily life.
Absolutely. And more recently, they added reckless or self-destructive behavior
Oh, wow.
as a symptom of PTSD. It really highlights how complex and varied the effects of PTSD can be.
Okay, so we've got these different ways PTSD can show up,
Yeah,
and then we've got treatments like prolonged exposure therapy
right.
that the VA has researched.
Yeah.
But what about the actual support systems out there for veterans?
That's a good
'Cause
question.
that's where this giant government document comes in, right?
It does.
Federal benefits for veterans for 2025.
Mhm.
I'm intimidated just looking at it.
It's comprehensive, that's for sure. But that's a good thing.
Okay, we
It
done.
shows the government is at least trying to provide a broad range of support. What's interesting is that there's an entire section specifically addressing the needs of women veterans.
Oh, really?
It mentions things like the Women Veterans Program and emphasizes community care options for those who qualify.
That's a good point. I know women veterans often have unique experiences and might face different barriers when trying to access care.
Yeah,
So it's encouraging that the document acknowledges that.
exactly. And it even addresses issues like family planning
Okay.
for veterans who might be dealing with the after effects of service. There's information about VA benefits for RDAVF, specifically for veterans with service-connected conditions affecting their ability to have children.
So even if someone is struggling to start a family
Yeah,
because of something that happened during their service,
right.
the VA might be able to help.
Exactly.
That's huge.
Yeah.
I'm also curious about this Veterans Crisis Line
Yeah.
mentioned in the document. What are the details on that?
It's a 2410 hotline available to veteran service members and their families in crisis, regardless of whether they're enrolled in other VA benefits.
That's got to be a lifeline for folks who are struggling. And it's reassuring that they don't have to jump through hoops to get help when they need it most.
That's a critical point. Accessibility is key, especially in a crisis.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, this document also dives deep into resources for veteran homelessness,
Okay.
which is another major concern.
Yeah, it mentions programs
Yeah.
like HUD VA-ish,
Yeah.
SSVF grants, and domiciliary care for homeless veterans.
Mm.
It seems like the VA is at least trying to tackle this issue from different angles.
It definitely looks that way. The document provides a really detailed breakdown of each of these programs,
Wow.
explaining who's eligible and what kind of support is offered.
But before we get lost in the weeds of specific benefits, let's pull back for a second.
Okay.
We've also got this website with even more resources and these video titles that you mentioned earlier.
Right.
Something called American Veterans Discarded and Forgotten. That sounds heavy.
It does, doesn't it? It makes you wonder if there's a disconnect between the vast array of benefits we're seeing in this document and the actual experiences of some veterans. It's a question worth exploring further.
Absolutely. And then there's this video about why veterans miss war. I have to admit that one really threw me for a loop.
Oh, yeah.
You'd think after experiencing combat, most people just want to put it all behind them.
It's more complex than that. It speaks to the profound impact military service has on people.
Oh.
The camaraderie, the purpose, even the adrenaline rush of combat.
Yeah.
Those things can leave a lasting impression, even if there was also trauma involved.
Okay, so there's this whole other layer to the veteran experience that we need to understand.
Yeah.
But getting back to the practicalities of support, one thing that keeps coming up in this benefits document
Okay.
is this idea of service-connected disabilities. What does that actually mean for someone trying to access these benefits?
That's where things can get a little tricky. Basically, to access many of these benefits, you often have to prove that your current needs are directly related to something that happened during your time in service.
So if you're dealing with PTSD, for example, you'd have to demonstrate that it stems from your military experience.
Exactly. And that's where documentation, like your DD-214, your service discharge form, becomes crucial. The document really stresses that veterans need to keep this in a safe and accessible place. It's basically the key that unlocks access to many of these benefits.
That makes sense. But I can see how this whole process could be overwhelming for someone who's already struggling.
It definitely can be. The document does mention that there are resources, like veteran service organizations, that can help veterans navigate the system and make sure they're getting everything they're entitled to.
Okay.
But it's important to go into it knowing that it might take some effort and persistence.
Well, it seems like we've just scratched the surface here. But this is a lot to digest already.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, from understanding PTSD to exploring this massive document on federal benefits.
Right.
Where do we go from here?
I think it would be helpful to delve deeper into some of the specific benefits outlined in the document, especially those that are most relevant to someone who might be dealing with PTSD. Things like healthcare disability compensation and housing assistance. Those are areas where veterans might have the most pressing needs.
That sounds like a plan. Let's take a closer look at those specific benefits and see what kind of valuable information we can pull out for you.
Sounds good. Picking up where we left off, let's take a closer look at the healthcare services offered by the VA.
Okay.
This document goes into a lot of detail, but what stands out to me is the emphasis on personalized care plans.
Oh, right. It mentions these patient-aligned care teams.
Yes.
Or PCTs.
Yes.
What are those all about?
Basically, it means you have a dedicated team of healthcare professionals working together to create a care plan that's tailored to your individual needs and goals.
That actually sounds kind of amazing, like having your own healthcare A-team.
Exactly. And they're not just focused on physical health. Mental health care is a huge priority, with specialized services for PTSD, substance abuse, and other mental health conditions.
So if you're dealing with PTSD, you can be sure that your care team will be equipped to support you.
Absolutely.
That's a relief to know. But what if you live in a rural area or just have trouble getting to a VA facility?
Right.
That's something I've heard veterans worry about.
Well, that's where telehealth comes in. The document highlights the VA's telehealth services through VA Health Connect.
Okay.
This allows veterans to access care remotely through video appointments or even online messaging with their providers.
So even if you can't physically get to a VA facility, you can still connect with your care team.
That's right.
That's incredibly helpful for folks who might be dealing with mobility issues or live far away from a VA hospital.
It's all about removing those barriers to care. But let's say you need a specialized service that's not available at your local VA facility. That's where community care options come in.
All right. The document mentioned that veterans might be able to receive care from providers outside of the VA system in certain circumstances.
Exactly what you're talking about?
Exactly. It acts as a safety net, ensuring that veterans can get the care they need, even if it's not directly provided by the VA.
Okay, that's good to know. This document is full of little details like that, things you wouldn't necessarily think about. Like I just noticed this part about how the VA is actually obligated to bill private health insurance for non-service connected conditions.
That's a really important point. If you have private health insurance, the VA will try to use that to cover any healthcare needs that aren't related to your military service.
Okay.
It's all about maximizing the resources available to you.
And they even mentioned travel reimbursement for veterans going to VA appointments.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense considering how spread out some of those facilities can be.
Yeah, they cover mileage reimbursement and even special transportation if it's medically necessary.
Wow.
They seem to have thought of everything. Speaking of thinking of everything,
Yeah.
what about disability compensation?
Right.
That's another big one. That comes up a lot when veterans are talking about benefits.
It can be a little confusing, but essentially disability compensation is a tax-free monthly payment for veterans who have disabilities that are a result of their service.
So if your PTSD is preventing you from working,
Yeah.
you could potentially receive disability compensation.
That's the idea. It's a way to acknowledge the sacrifices veterans have made and provide some financial stability while they're dealing with the lasting effects of their service.
And just to be clear, this includes both physical and mental health conditions, right?
Absolutely. PTSD, depression, anxiety, those are all conditions that could qualify for disability compensation as long as they're connected to your military service.
Okay.
And it's important to remember that this also includes conditions resulting from military sexual trauma.
That's a crucial point. No one should be left behind when it comes to getting the support they need.
Right.
But I'm guessing the amount of compensation varies depending on how severe the disability is.
You're right. The more severe the disability, the higher the compensation.
Okay.
And there's also something called special monthly compensation, which provides additional benefits for veterans facing specific circumstances.
Like what kind of circumstances?
Well, it could include things like needing regular aid and attendance from another person, or having a particularly severe disability that requires a higher level of care. They've tried to account for different levels of need. They even offer a clothing allowance if you need prosthetic or orthopedic appliances that cause wear and tear on your clothes.
Wow, that's a level of detail I wouldn't have expected. It sounds like they're really trying to think holistically about the challenges veterans might be facing.
And that same level of attention extends to housing assistance. The document highlights a whole range of programs designed to help veterans secure stable housing.
Yeah, we already talked about the HUD VSH program for homeless veterans.
Right.
What are some of the other options?
Well, there's also the Specially Adapted Housing Grant. This can help veterans with certain service-connected disabilities modify their homes to meet their needs.
Okay.
For example, if you need wheelchair ramps or wider doorways, this grant can help cover those costs.
That's amazing. But I bet there's a lot of fine print when it comes to qualifying for those kinds of programs.
You're right. The document is very specific about the eligibility criteria for each program, emphasizing that you often have to demonstrate a direct connection between your need for housing assistance and your time in service.
So it's not just a matter of saying, I'm a veteran, I need housing help.
Right.
You have to show how your housing needs are linked to your military experience.
Exactly, and that's where documentation becomes crucial again. Keeping track of your medical records, service records, and any other relevant documents is essential.
It sounds like organization is key when it comes to navigating this whole benefits system.
It is.
But let's shift gears for a second and talk about education and training benefits. I know a lot of veterans are interested in using their GI Bill to go back to school or learn new skills.
Absolutely. And this document devotes a whole section to the post-9/11 GI Bill, which can help veterans pay for college, vocational training, or even on-the-job apprenticeships.
Wow.
It's a fantastic opportunity for veterans to pursue their educational and career goals.
And it's not just limited to the veterans themselves, right?
That's right. The document explains that surviving spouses and dependents of eligible veterans might also qualify for education benefits.
Okay.
It's acknowledging that service has a ripple effect impacting families as well.
That's good to know. But what about veterans who served before the post-9/11 era? Are there any education benefits available to them?
Of course. The document mentions programs like the Veterans Educational Assistance Program or VEAP for those who served before the post-9/11 GI Bill was enacted.
Okay.
And there's even information about eligibility criteria for tuition assistance based on your state of residence.
So even if you'd have served decades ago, there might still be educational opportunities available to you.
Exactly.
It seems like they've really tried to cover all the bases, no matter when you served or where you live.
They've definitely put a lot of thought into creating a system that's as inclusive as possible.
Okay, so we've covered healthcare,
Mm.
disability compensation, housing assistance,
Mm-hmm.
and education benefits.
Mm.
What else is in this treasure trove of information?
Well, we haven't even touched on life insurance yet.
Oh, right.
The document outlines several options, including service members group life insurance,
Mm-hmm.
or SGLI, which is available to active duty service members.
Okay.
And then there's veterans group life insurance,
Mm-hmm.
or VGLI, for veterans who recently separated from service. It's all about providing peace of mind and financial security for veterans and their families.
And I see they even have a specialized life insurance option
Hmm.
called Veterans Mortgage Life Insurance,
Mm.
or VMLI.
Right.
What's that all about?
That one's specifically for veterans who have received a specially adapted housing grant.
Okay.
Again, it's an example of how they've tailored these benefits to address very specific needs.
It's clear that the VA has put a lot of effort into creating a comprehensive system of support for veterans.
They have.
But is it actually working? Are veterans getting the help they need?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've seen all these programs and benefits laid out in this document.
Right.
But the reality is that navigating the system can be incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
It requires knowledge persistence and often assistance from outside organizations.
So even with all these resources available, there's still a risk of falling through the cracks.
Unfortunately, yes. And that's why it's so important to talk about these things, to raise awareness and make sure veterans know what's out there and how to access it.
For sure.
You're not alone.
Well, we've definitely covered a lot of ground today,
Mm.
but I feel like we've only just begun to scratch the surface of this complex issue.
You're absolutely right. There's so much more to explore. And we'll continue this deep dive in the next part.
Okay.
We'll delve into the potential challenges of accessing these benefits and look at some additional resources that might be helpful.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time unpacking this document on federal benefits for veterans.
It is a lot of info.
It's a bit of a beast, but it's packed with useful information.
Yeah.
One thing that keeps coming up is this idea that to access many of these benefits, you need to prove that your current needs are directly connected to your time in service.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It seems like a pretty crucial piece of the puzzle.
It is, and it's where that DD-214, that service discharge form, comes in again.
Right.
This document really hammers home the importance of keeping that form safe and accessible.
Yeah, they practically beg you to treat it like it's made of gold. But I get it if your current disability is related to your time and service. It makes sense that you'd need to be able to prove that connection.
Yeah, for sure.
What if you disagree with a VA decision about a claim? Is there any recourse?
Absolutely. The document outlines a whole appeals process. So if you think a decision was unfair or inaccurate, you have options.
Okay.
There's a multi-tiered appeals system that ensures veterans can seek reconsideration and have their claims thoroughly reviewed.
Okay, so there are checks and balances in place. That's reassuring.
Yeah, definitely.
But let's zoom out a bit from individual benefits. The document also mentions programs aimed at supporting veterans as a whole, not just those with specific needs.
Right.
One that caught my eye is the Transition Assistance Program, or TP.
Oh, yeah.
What's that all about?
It's designed for service members who are transitioning back to civilian life.
Okay.
It helps them prepare for things like finding a job, accessing health care, and navigating their VA benefits. Think of it as a bridge between military service and the civilian world.
That sounds incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
Especially considering how different those two worlds can be.
Exactly. And they even have specialized programs for women veterans, recognizing that their transition experience might have unique challenges.
Right.
There's even a women's health transition training, which specifically focuses on VA healthcare services for women.
It's good to see that they're paying attention to those nuances. But what about veterans who are thinking about starting their own businesses? Is there any support for entrepreneurs?
There is. The document mentions the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, which offers resources and guidance to veterans who want to launch their own businesses.
So the VA isn't just about meeting basic needs like healthcare and housing. They're actively trying to help veterans thrive
Yeah.
in all areas of life, even in the business world.
That's right. They really are.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. PTSD, the VA benefit system,
Yeah.
the challenges of accessing those benefits.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to take in. What stands out to you the most?
Honestly, I'm struck by the sheer volume of support that's available. The government has invested a tremendous amount of resources into creating this network of benefits and services for veterans.
I agree, but it's also clear that navigating this system can be incredibly daunting.
For sure.
It requires knowledge persistence and often help from organizations like veteran service organizations.
That's a key takeaway for sure. Don't be afraid to reach out for help. There are people out there who understand the system and can guide you through it.
That's really important.
You're not alone.
Well said. If you were to give one piece of advice to a veteran who's trying to figure all of this out, what would it be?
I'd say this. Be your own advocate. Keep those records organized. Ask questions. And don't hesitate to push back if you feel like you're not getting the support you deserve.
That's great advice. Well, this has been an incredibly informative deep dive.
It has.
But unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time together.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. And remember, this episode was designed specifically for you, based on the sources you provided. We encourage you to keep exploring this topic and to reach out for support if you need it. Until next time.